Good afternoon and welcome to Bulldogs Behind the Scenes. This series offers an inside look at the people, places, and research connected to the University of Minnesota Duluth. Today we are exploring the topic of inattentional blindness and some of the current research being done in this area. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment here to pause so that everyone has a chance to log on. Well, my name is Molly Clevin, and I'm with the UMD Alumni Relations Office. Thank you all for joining us today. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive with Dr. Jason Ford to learn more about his research on inattentional blindness and how he has expanded on foundational studies in this field. Before we begin, I'd like to mention a few of the places we featured in the series, including the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, Amsoil Arena, the Superior Hiking Trail, the proposed UMD Sales Center, the UMD Chocolate Lab, Romano Gym, and many more. If you missed any of these sessions, you can find all of the recordings at d.umn.edu/alumni. As a quick reminder, today's session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our website. You'll receive an email with that link once it's ready. We'll have time for questions at the end, so as you're listening, feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Now I'm excited to introduce Dr. Jason Ford. Dr. Ford earned his bachelor's degree in philosophy from UC Berkeley and his PhD degree at UC Irvine. He joined UMD's faculty in 2005 and earned tenure in 2012. His work centers on attention, consciousness, and perception, and he is currently studying inattentional blindness as well as the implications of visual snow for theories of mind. From 2019 to 2021, he served as Interim Associate Dean for the College of Liberal Arts and the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. Jason, thank you so much for being here, and I'll now turn it over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm happy to be able to present some of my work, and I hope that the audience will also find it interesting. My email is there on the first page, and I am certainly happy to talk with anyone who would like to talk with me. So let's go. So way back in 1999, two prominent psychologists, Simons and Chabris, published a study called Gorillas in Our Midst. So what they did was they constructed a video, and there were two teams, each team having three people. One team was wearing white shirts, one team was wearing dark shirts. Each team had a basketball, and they would bounce their basketballs and bob and weave and circle, and they would pass their ball to other players wearing the same color shirts. So there's two teams, each has a basketball. And the subjects were told to count the number of times that one of the teams, and they ran studies with both types, passed their basketball. And during the middle of the bobbing and weaving, a person in a gorilla suit strolls in, stands in the middle, thumps their chest gorilla fashion, and then strolls off the other side. So all the ball players are moving around the person in the gorilla suit. And I think most people would presume that if a person in a gorilla suit were to stroll into their field of vision and stand right in the middle of the field of vision and then move away, that everybody thinks that they would probably spot it. And I think that most of the members of the audience would probably agree. The very surprising finding was that if the volunteers were told to count the number of passes by the team in the white shirts, half of them did not notice the gorilla, which stopped in the middle and then moved on. That is, when asked, did you see anything unusual? Half of the people said no. That was the very interesting and surprising finding. Now, I'm a philosopher, and philosophers of mind in my area, we read empirical studies like this and we try to think about what it means for how consciousness works. So there are some people who came out with interpretations of those experimental results. And some prominent people, Dennett and Blackmore, claimed that these findings showed that our own conscious experience is limited to whatever's happening in the focus of attention. And that might be surprising because it means that our sense that we might be aware of more than what's happening in the focus of attention is wrong, that we are in fact wrong about our own conscious experience in every moment. So, right now, I imagine that you're looking at the screen and you're listening to my words, but elsewhere in your conscious experience, you are also peripherally aware of your body position. If you're sitting down, if you're at a standing desk, if you're listening to this as you do some other activity, that even though the focus of attention is on one thing, you are in fact consciously aware of more. And I believe that's probably going to be the case for all of us. So these philosophers claim that we are in fact wrong in our sense that there is more in consciousness than whatever is in the focus of attention. Um, some other researchers in cognitive science identify consciousness with what's happening in attention and working memory. And since the person in the gorilla suit didn't make it into attention, and they didn't make it into working memory because the subjects didn't recall it, therefore it was not conscious. Now, that's a very, very strong claim to make, and it's the claim that I want to challenge. But just to summarize, on those approaches, it would follow that items to which a person is inattentionally blind must not be appearing in that person's consciousness at all. Um, Sorry, there's another cognitive scientist named Smithies who proposes this as the limitation theory, as the limitation thesis. And that's the claim that consciousness just is limited to attention. And in nearly every place in philosophy, cognitive science, and psychology, attention is identified with the focus of attention. Now, I disagree. I think that there is also a periphery of attention, and that it ought to be included in our explanation of consciousness. That is, we are in fact consciously aware of things that are in the focus and in the periphery. And then there's other things which are truly unattended and unconscious. In philosophy of mind, there is a similar error, most often tacitly committed, which treats consciousness as coextensive with the focus of attention. And the standard move, the arguments that are made, is to show that there's something which might or might not be conscious, and it does not have the features which are present if the thing were in the focus of attention. So if something's in the focus of attention, then it's usually available for a verbal report. The person is able to answer determinate questions about it, and so on. And then they argue that since the person can't answer those questions, then the feature, whatever it was, must not be in their consciousness. So this is a graphic representation of how I think things really work and what the standard tacit assumption is. So on the standard tacit assumption, there just is a sharp break between what's in the focus of attention and what is wholly unattended, whereas I think there are degrees of attention within the periphery, and that both the focus and periphery should be conscious. So what I did is I got a little grant, and I was able to pay our good friends over in the Viz lab to shoot some new videos. And in each of the videos, I altered some feature from the original experiment to see what kind of difference those changes would make on the rates of inattentional blindness. And what I'm going to do here is show you what my research subjects see and talk about some results that I got. So it's true, most philosophers don't run psychological experiments, but I'm a weird philosopher, and it's a thing that I wanted to do, and so I was able to. So the instructions that my subjects get is that this is an experiment in visual attention. It will require a lot of visual attention because the conditions are challenging. Their task is to count the number of times the team in white shirts passes their basketball from one person to another. And then when they're ready, they hit the space bar and a video plays. And this is the video. And those are all UMD students who helped me make these videos. There we go. Then I would ask, how many times did the team in white shirts pass their basketball? Because that was the stated task. Then I'd ask them if they saw anything else. And if the answer was no, then they experienced inattentional blindness. If the answer is yes, then they did not. And then I'd ask them what they saw. Then I would ask them to tell me the first 5 words that come to mind that start with the letters G-O. So, for example, good would count. Then I would ask them if they've ever seen a video like this before. If they have, then they were not a naive subject. They knew that there was going to be some trickery going on, and so they were more on guard. Um, but I could still use their STEM completion data. And then I asked about their handedness because no one had been asking that particular question in these kinds of studies before, and it's all done. So the whole thing took a few minutes. And then I would do the debriefing and tell them all about what went on. So these are the 3 experiments that I'm going to present to you right now. The first experiment was where I tried to replicate the original experiments as closely as I could to get a baseline for my particular research. On the second experiment, I lopped off all the time at the beginning of the video, and that's the video that you actually saw. So as soon as the person pushed the button, the people with the basketball started to move, and the person in the gorilla suit walked straight onto the screen. And the ball passing continued for 10 more seconds after the person in the gorilla suit left the video. Then I ran the third experiment where there were 15 seconds of ball passing at the beginning before the gorilla appears on screen. And then the gorilla's on the screen for 8 seconds. And the video ends just as soon as the person in the gorilla suit. Surprising. So my baseline was pretty close to what Simons and Chabris got. I was about 39%. For the small number of subjects that we were using, that's not a significant difference from the 50% that they got. However, in the task number 2, where the gorilla appears immediately, my rate of inattentional blindness was nearly double. It was 68%. And that is surprising because most people, once they were told about what inattentional blindness is and how it works, expect that it takes some time to focus attention on the task. And so the people in the gorilla suit should be spotted more frequently if there's no time between when the task begins and when the person with the gorilla suit walks on. What I found was the opposite. And in my third experiment, I found that lopping the time off the end of the task did not make much difference. In fact, I had slightly more inattentional blindness, but it was not statistically significant. This is a graphical representation based on how much time there was. So when the gorilla enters just as soon as the task begins, high rate of inattentional blindness. When I tried to duplicate the baseline experiment, middling rate, and when the tasks when I lapped off the time at the end, a middling rate. Here's what I think it means. So I believe that the fact that the inattentional blindness was much stronger at the beginning shows that the subjects were focusing their attention much more intensely on the task even before the task began. There's a term for this in attention research called the attentional set. And this means that the attentional set was in place and operating strongly before the task even began. And once the person became more accustomed to the task, then their focus of attention spread out a bit more over the scene. And we get the rate of inattentional blindness that Simons and Chabris found and that I found in my baseline study. And this may be part of the explanation for why texting and driving is so dangerous, because even before one's eyes leave the road, so that you this is when you're preparing to text, you've diverted your attention away from your driving, including your visual experience of the road, and so you will be either missing or slower to respond to things which otherwise you would be able to respond to more quickly. This will also allow either myself or other experimenters to vary the attentional demands of their tasks by varying the amount of time before the critical stimulus, whatever the thing you're experimenting about, is presented to subjects in an attentional blindness study. I ran the third experiment because there's a different explanation being offered by some researchers in psychology that what really is happening here is amnesia. So it's not the case that people don't consciously see the gorilla. On their explanation, everybody sees it, but for some people, it never makes it out of working memory. And so it has been lost by the time the experimenters ask the question, did you see anything unusual? So if that was a memory effect, then by stopping the experiment 10 seconds sooner, that's 10 more seconds for people to retain the memory of seeing the gorilla. And if it is a memory effect, then the rate of inattentional blindness should go down dramatically. And it didn't. It went up slightly. And this confirms some results which also tended to indicate that this is not inattentional amnesia. It really is a perceptual effect. So it really is a kind of inattentional blindness. Now, you may be wondering, why did I ask for words that start with the letters G-O? There's another way of studying inattentional blindness, and Mack and Rock did this in their landmark book, Inattentional Blindness. And they used a different kind of experimental setup to study inattentional blindness. What they would do is they'd give their subjects a demanding task, and they would briefly flash a word or some other thing at the center of the person's visual field while the person was attending to a task in the periphery of their visual field. And they found that even the inattentionally blind subjects who said, I saw nothing, the experience of having that word flashed in the screen left some traces so that those people were then more likely to come up with the word which they had seen, or seen is not the right word, the short word which they had been presented with, even though they reported that they saw nothing. So this is a concern for me because on my hypothesis, I think what's happening is the people in the inattentional blindness study are not seeing the person in the gorilla suit as a gorilla. What I believe is happening is they're interpreting the person in the gorilla suit as just another player in dark clothing. However, if the subjects really are seeing the person in the gorilla suit as a gorilla, then Mack and Rock's studies indicate that seeing a gorilla, even if one does not report it later, should leave priming traces. So I use the STEM completion task to check for priming traces. And now I will show you my results. So you present some short word, like chart, then ask the inattentionally blind subjects for the first words that come to mind that start with CHA, in this case. And if they come up with chart, you count that as a hit. And then you compare that number to the control group. And for me, the control group is just people that I spent an afternoon pestering in the hallways at UMD and asking them to give me the first 5 words that come to mind with G-O, that start with G-O. And I got a lot of funny looks, so I got to say things like, yeah, it's for science. Just give me some words if you have time. And I got my control data. This is what Mack and Rock found. So they found what you're going to want to do is compare the solid gray columns here with the much smaller white columns. And that represents the difference between people who reported they saw nothing and yet came up with the word with which they were presented, compared to the number of people who just came up with the word at random, not having been presented with anything. So the control groups, they haven't recently been presented with anything that starts with, in this case, FLA for flake, or GR for grace, or SH for short, and so on. And they also did it with a couple of other words, charm, cork, and herd, and they reran it with flake and grace, and they got very, very significant results. So the big difference between the solid gray lines, solid gray bars and the white bars indicate that this really is a very strong effect. Now, they also tried it in another way. So suppose you present the short word like flake, and then you just present the subject with 5 pictures and just choose them, tell them to pick one. One of them is related to flake, but all of them are things which could start with FL. Which means one of the words is semantically linked to the picture. One of the pictures is semantically linked to the word. That is by virtue of its meaning. And then you compare the rate at which your control subjects just choose that picture at random and compare it with the rate at which it is chosen by the inattentionally blind subjects. Here's their example for flake. So the car is supposed to represent a flat tire on a car, the flame of the candle, the snowflake, the flag, and the flash on a camera. And this is Mac and Rock's drawings for cork. So there's a coat, corn, coffee, a couch, and a cork. These are their results. There's a big difference between now the gray bars and then the 12% gray bar that's sitting off to the right. That's what you're comparing them to. So it's 48% and 42% for the inattentionally blind subjects. Only 12% of the controls picked the respective image out of the list of 5. So what this means for me, my controls, the people I just pestered in hallways, one of them came out with the word gorilla as one of the 5 words I asked for, which gives me a rate of 3.3% of gorilla production. And the rate for my inattentionally blind subjects was very close to that. It was 2.8%. That's really close. However, the number of subjects who reported that they saw something, whether they said gorilla or mascot, or maybe they mistook it for being a bear, anything like that, anybody who saw something, I asked the very same question, and 38%, 38.5% came up with the word gorilla. So that's a substantial difference. If the percentage of my inattentionally blind subjects had been much higher than my controls, it would mean that there was, in fact, semantic priming, and that my hypothesis was that the person was not seen as a gorilla. My hypothesis would have been falsified. So, since the percentages are very close, it means that I am not wrong in that particular way. It may not mean that I'm correct, but I'm trying to check to see if there's a way that my theory could be falsified. It could have been falsified by these STEM completion results, and it was not. Now, I'm also going to run, and I'm currently running a different variation. I'm just going to show you what the other variations are. All of these were produced by the Viz Lab and our motion capture lab. The one I'm running right now puts the gorilla on the ceiling. So my hypothesis is that because people don't normally walk on ceilings, it will be more difficult to interpret that as just another player in dark clothing. So the rate of inattentional blindness should go way down, and the rate of gorilla reporting should go up. I also have different colors. The Viz Lab was able to wipe out the color of the gorilla and put in whatever we wanted. So including a plaid gorilla, which I do believe ought to draw attention. Since I'm interested in the periphery, I also have a shared peripheral detail between the team you're supposed to watch the team in white, they're now wearing flower necklaces, and the gorilla, which is also wearing a flower necklace. I want to see if having some shared detail increases the rate of gorilla reporting and decreases the rate of inattentional blindness. In another set, I'm going to present some of my subjects with photos, and some of those photos will be related to gorillas. So there's a gorilla, there's an orangutan, there's a poster for King Kong, and a banana. And I want to see if priming before the task changes the rate at which people will report seeing the gorilla. I also have a different video where the camera's further away, so the perspective is different. And the direction of the gorilla's travel through the frame. All of the ones I've seen have the gorilla going from right to left, but suppose the gorilla goes from left to right. I don't expect that to make any difference, but no one's checked, so I want to try it. And if there is a difference, I want to see if it's connected with handedness, which is why I asked that question. Now, if I'm right, the brain is actually producing a whole bunch of representations in the periphery of attention. And there is a question, why should the brain bother doing that? Because it's very costly. The brain consumes a lot of resources, a lot of glucose, a lot of oxygen. And there could be an evolutionary argument against the existence of a periphery of attention because nearby evolutionary cousins who don't waste that energy should have a survival advantage. But what I believe is really the case is that having those representations allows attention to be shifted very quickly from whatever's in the focus to something which is in the periphery, add just a little more processing, and it becomes fully conscious, and the person is able to respond appropriately to it. So it actually winds up saving time. And I have a publication on that. Next steps. You could vary the amount of time before the gorilla appears, and that way you could track the time course of how attention is deployed. On the theoretical side, there are some theories in the philosophy of mind which can easily accommodate my results. Those are the three at the bottom there. And there are some theories of mind which would require some substantial changes in order to accommodate my results. Thank you very much. These are the credits. So the Viz Lab and the Mad Lab are the ones who helped me make these videos. And by helped, I mean they did all the work. They shot the video, they edited the video, they did the motion capture, they swapped out the colors, they did it all. Also here are my student volunteers, the people who got to wear gorilla suits, and all the people who got to pass basketballs in all the various videos that I shot. And these were made possible by an Imagine Fund grant and a Chancellor Small grant and the College of Liberal Arts Research grant. And I thank you very much for your attention. I am open to questions.
Well, thank you, Jason, for sharing your research. And as he mentioned, we are now taking Q&A. So as a reminder, you can use the bottom of your the chat box here to submit your question or the Q&A button as well. And let's get Jason on here. We can see him.
Okay, let's see if that worked.
Perfect.
Oh, here I am. Hello.
Awesome. Okay, so we had several questions that were submitted in advance through the registration form. But as I mentioned, you can submit them live and we'll try to get to as many as we can.
I'll
So,
also take any comments or feedback.
perfect. Okay, so the first question that we have is, how is inattentional blindness different from general distraction or lack of attention?
They are in fact the same phenomena. Inattentional blindness is when, in some experimental setting, the effects of distraction are being measured, and they are as surprising as being unable to recall a gorilla just having walked through one's visual field. Um, so it's the same phenomena. It's just a term that's been employed when it's been studied in an experimental setting. It's exactly the same kind of phenomenon that, for instance, stage magicians and pickpockets use. So a pickpocket will distract their person, their target, and because the person's attention is diverted to whatever the pickpocket is doing, that's distraction, they're able to lift the person's wallet or extract the item from a handbag or whatever. So I don't think pickpockets or stage magicians would be nearly as surprised by these results as other people.
That's an interesting real life example. Great, thank you. Another question is wondering, do you think people can train themselves to reduce inattentional blindness?
Oh, that's going to be hard because when inattentional blindness occurs, it's because people are focusing their attention on the task to which they have been uh, dedicated. So, for a person to have a lower rate of overall inattentional blindness, it would mean they are not concentrating on whatever it is their dedicated task is. So, I mm, now I'm fluctuating between saying whether it could be done or not, or if it could be done, whether it would be desirable or not. And I'm not sure the answer to that one.
Okay. Couple questions about applying this to the real world.
Certainly.
So I see that one came in, and there was another question that's similar. How could this affect safety? You had mentioned texting and driving. Are there other ways that inattentional blindness might affect maybe safety in the workplace?
Certainly. I mean, it'll depend on the workplace. But there was a study that was not a study that was done. There was an attempt to improve the airplane pilots' experience and accuracy at doing their jobs. And the phenomenon of inattentional blindness shot this whole thing down. So what they tried to do is they instead of having all these different buttons and dials and gauges and everything on the dashboard of the plane, you've got this little window. They thought it would be better for the pilots to have a bigger window so they can see more what's going on and use a heads-up display to put those gauges and dials and information in the window itself. So all they have to do is look over here and they can see where what their altimeter rating is, and then they can look up and they'll be fine. That was the idea. Unfortunately, when they tested this in flight simulators, they found that the pilots would crash a lot more frequently. They would run their airplane straight into another airplane while they were focused on some reading in their meter. So that's one workplace where this would make a difference. What that shows is you do not want to attempt to force your person, the employee, to focus their attention on one demanding task while also needing to be aware of another demanding task. It also might be why things like Google Glass didn't really catch on. I haven't, I don't know if that's the case or not, but if there's something which is currently popping up in my visual field, it's going to make it more difficult for me to do ordinary other things. Certainly driving, never do that. But even things like walking, I can imagine, tripping more often and bumping into people. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and there's another question just wondering about the implications of the research on multitasking, which seems to have been debunked, that we only have singular focused attention that might shift.
Yeah,
Uh,
so multitasking, I think, is best described as shifting one's attention from one task to another quickly.
okay.
Yeah. And I think the results, both from the original study and my own, are consistent with that interpretation of what's going on.
Okay. So, wondering about how inattentional blindness might affect someone's cognitive ability. And
Hmm.
then, kind of the second part of the question is wondering if there are certain personality traits that maybe make you more susceptible to it.
Sure. The first answer is inattentional blindness is not a cognitive deficit. It's a side effect of a cognitive ability to focus one's attention. So the greater one's attentional focus, the more one will be vulnerable to inattentional blindness as an unintended side effect. And to the best of my knowledge, there is no set of traits which predispose people to have more or less inattentional blindness. Um, in the original studies, it's close to 50%, so it's not really diagnostic or indicative for anything as far as I know.
Well, and you were asking whether or not people are right-handed or left-handed. Has your research shown whether one-handed person is more susceptible to it?
I haven't yet run the experiment with the person in the gorilla suit going from left to right. So I haven't run those data to see if there's a correlation or not. Not yet.
Okay. So you had talked about the Google Glass,
Hmm.
and do you think that artificial intelligence might impact inattentional blindness?
Hmm. Uh, if this were to occur in a classroom, I would then ask the person who had the hand up to explain what they had in mind a little bit more. Uh, Inattention. I'm not sure. So artificial intelligences are not conscious. I mean, there's no reason to suspect that any artificial intelligence system which is currently existing has anything like conscious experience. Um, if the question was more about could an artificial intelligence system be used to assist humans in avoiding negative consequences of having inattentional blindness, then I'm not sure. I mean, possibly, but I'm not sure that was the question. I'll pause here and allow the questioner to send more question.
Sure. Well, in the meantime, there was another person kind of circling back to human nature, personality. Um, are there any insights into whether a person with diagnosed or untreated ADHD would perform differently on these tasks than other people?
Again, I don't know the answer to that. As I try to keep abreast of the literature, and I haven't found anything like that yet. Um, since ADHD was not screened as a condition which needed to be taken into account in the original study. I'm not screening it for in my study as either. So I'm getting the same percentage of people who happen to have that, diagnosed or undiagnosed, as were in the original studies, which is really what I should be getting if I'm going to be comparing my results to theirs.
Sure. Well, and I think this final question for you is what do you think, or what are you most excited about with your research findings?
Well, I'm really looking forward to the results from the gorilla on the ceiling. I've been trying to get that to to take my experiment so that it can be done online, so that I can get a lot of subjects quickly. The results that I presented today, I interacted with the volunteers one person at a time, and I don't have grad students, so that was pretty time consuming. So I've been looking for ways to try to get more data more quickly and get it more reliably. And I tried using Amazon's Mechanical Turk system, but it didn't work really well. Their customer service wasn't that great. I'm now working with a different company called Forthright, and so far, I mean, I've running the experiments with 100 subjects at a time, but for reasons which I still do not quite understand, even when I test my baseline experiment, I'm getting a different set of results. So the rate of inattentional blindness for the online subjects seems to be much higher, even in my baseline study. And I don't know why that's the case. And I want to try to figure that out before I go on and do even more of the variations through Forthright. I may or may not be able to figure that part out. I mean, there could be a paper just in noting that this is an unusual difference. I might just have to keep my data separate. The stuff that I gathered in person, just keep that separate from the stuff that I gather online.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, maybe there'll be a part two in the future for behind the scenes on this research.
Well, that indeed might be the case. According to my watch, it looks like we have 5 minutes. Do we have more questions?
Yeah, well, I think that was it. And I just wanted to kind of give a shout out here. I know in the registration there were a few folks that actually were a part of the study of Dr.
Hey,
Ford. So that's kind of fun. Thank you for joining us today. And
thank you
um,
very much.
with that, I just want to thank you, Jason, for sharing with us this really interesting research, and for all of you for joining us today. And if you are not a UMD alum and you would like to continue attending these virtual sessions, feel free to email us at alumni@d.umn.edu, and we will definitely get you on our email list. With that, just thank you so much,
Oh,
Jason, and
one thing I do want to say, if you have questions, or if I didn't answer the question completely or in the way that you would like, I am certainly open to continuing the conversations via email. So if you have questions or questions I didn't fully address, please email me.
we will include Dr. Ford's email in our follow-up communication, so you'll have access to that as well. So thank you all again, and we hope you have a great day and that you'll join us again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.